The roots of politics are older than humanity. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I'm going to share with you one of my favorite books, Franz De Waal's Chimpanzee Politics. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, the study of primates, and particularly chimpanzees, was going through a radical transformation that reshaped our understanding of human evolution and behavior. You see, up to this point, the prevailing thought was that early humans and our predecessors lived idyllic, peaceful lives, and things like violence and war and politics, they were part of a compromise where individuals gave up their tranquil lives in exchange for the benefits of civilization. But De Waal's research, along with some things that Jane Goodall was discovering, showed that at least when it came to our nearest cousins, their lives were full of privilege, network, negotiation, arbitration, alliance, divide and rule, power struggles, and takeovers. And what clearly showed this was a series of leadership changes in a chimpanzee troop at the Arnhem Zoo. What the researchers found was that this takeover was the result of months of unobtrusive social maneuvering, and it wasn't the result of a big fight. You see, the future leader had to do two things. He had to prove that he had the power to dethrone the incumbent, and simultaneously he had to secure the support of the other chimpanzees. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the timeline of this takeover. That's a story for another day. Instead, what I want to do is focus on some of the simple social behaviors that form the basic building blocks of power, and you'll see that there are distinct parallels to human behavior. The first one is the simple, common, extended hand with palm up. Chimps of all ages and statuses use this as an invitation to play, or when requesting food, or to form alliances. If you embed gestures like this, where you invite others to partner with you, even in the midst of conflict, you can come together. Next, you have a form of greeting between male chimps that the researchers called a bluff over. And the way this worked is a subordinate male would cringe and grovel, clearly acquiescing to a dominant male who would puff themselves up. They'd make loud noises. They might even make threatening gestures. Now, where this gets interesting is where they don't follow the script. I mean, dominant, subordinate, it can be relatively subjective, especially if the two hold very similar positions within the troop hierarchy. An up-and-comer may refuse to grovel, and that may set off a noisy exchange. You might call these tiny interactions microaggressions. And if you look around the conference room table, you'll notice that this testing and reinforcing of the hierarchy, it's happening pretty regularly. There's another way that conflict can test the organization. Back in 1982, De Waal called this instigation, but those of you who enjoy the guilty pleasure of a Karen video, you might notice something distinctly human here. This occurs when two chimpanzees of relatively equal rank, often females, get into conflict, and the threatened one will seek the support of another chimp, typically a dominant male. And then that third chimpanzee enters the fray. This kind of instigation has a tendency to spread conflict to the larger group, and you've probably seen something similar to this in the office. One of the interesting things here is that, at least among chimpanzees, the instigator rarely participates in the ensuing chaos. Now, however conflict starts, the researchers saw two really interesting things during the conflict. The first they called confiscation. You can kind of imagine a male chimpanzee, he's all puffed up, he's going around making a lot of noise, he's threatening others, and in his hand, he's holding a rock. Frequently, a junior member of the troop, often a female, would casually approach the male and take the rock away. And what the researchers saw that fascinated them was that the male would rarely resist this. And I'm going to be a little more specific about how you might see this in the bureaucracy. Imagine an angry, dominant figure who's threatening some kind of action, and a subordinate quietly removes that threat. Now, this can happen when that dominant figure is kind of unfamiliar with the details of the threat they're making. Like a colonel who's new to the Pentagon. On one hand, that confiscation prevents professional injury as the result of misuse of a poorly understood action. But just because that dominant figure doesn't resist, it doesn't mean that they don't feel a sense of resentment or a lack of support. The other behavior that researchers observed was seeking refuge. When there was a moment of aggression in the troop, apes would often move towards a dominant male and either sit beside or behind him. You probably know that I don't like backseaters. I like my people spread throughout the room, so I've got good line of sight with them. One of the reasons I don't like backseaters is because it mimics this behavior of seeking refuge. The other thing I find fascinating about seeking refuge is pay attention to where people sit. People who feel threatened when they come into a conference room will almost always sit close to someone who they believe can protect them. The reason this matters is because if people seek refuge by sitting near you, it communicates to the rest of the room that you have influence. Now, there's one final behavior from Chimpanzee Politics that often crops up in human interactions. This comes after the conflict, and it's called reconciliation. You might think that after a big ruckus that the opponents would stay out of each other's way for a while, but De Waal and his researchers observed the exact opposite. In fact, in some cases, in less than 60 seconds after the conflict, the opponents would embrace and groom one another, and these interactions tended to be much more intense than the normal behaviors. So guess what? The same thing is going on in the Pentagon. Our reconciliations tend to be more private, but they are no less intense. Two colonels will go hammer and tongs in a conference room, and almost immediately they'll walk back to one of their offices and be shaking hands and slapping each other on the back, going, "Yeah, it's just business," and "Yeah, I got you, brother." Reason that reconciliation is important is because don't fight it. It is very normal, it is very healthy, and what's more, you don't lose what you gained in the meeting. Like I said, Chimpanzee Politics is just full of insights that put our day-to-day interactions into an entirely new light. And I can't promise that I won't be bringing up more things from this book. But in the meantime, check out this video.